All right, let's start. To 42. Two Souls, One Journey. A raw and unedited look into our lives as humans. Based on the 21 grams experiment by Dr. Duncan McDougall, who concluded that the human soul weighs 21 grams. On this podcast, we will explore that no matter what our lives look like on paper, our souls journey similarly. In this episode, we are speaking with someone I undeniably have a soul journey with. In the last decade, I said we were the same girl, different decade. Now I'm going to say we are the same soul. Oh my god, I lost my line. So we're the same soul, different hairstyles. He's the man that gave me this shirt. He's my drag mother. I'm his drag older sister. He can have that. I've had the privilege to have him walk with me hand in hand in my brown boy queerness, my addiction, my masculinity, my femininity, and I know my future endeavors. He's a community builder. He's a psychotherapist who's been doing some heavy lifting with the Canadian POC community for the last, I'd say, decade or so. He's a change maker. He's a global shifter. He's now an author. He's got curls for days, eyelashes for weeks, attitudes for years, sass for decades. And his heart is bigger than no time can contain. Welcome, Ms. Rahim Thawer. Hello, girl.
Hello. Thanks for having me. That's quite the introduction. And I'm honored to be here. So ask me all the things, sister.
Yeah, I think we've been waiting for this for a while. I feel like since January of last year, I've been dying to do this podcast with you. And I'm so glad that we're finally getting to do it because... I mean, for people out there, Rahim and I moved to Winnipeg in September, and now in July, Rahim's leaving. So it's almost like we get a chance to explore. Like I wanted to do it earlier than I thought we could, and now we're getting to explore it at the end of our journey, which is very exciting because I think it'll allow us to talk about more things. Yeah?
I mean, we also had lots of walks around the city, during the many lockdowns, and you would talk about having me on your podcast, and I'd be like, what are we going to talk about? Like the same thing that we talk about on our walks. And you're like, yes, I want to take notes. It seems like even in our casual, hangouts in the city, we uncovered some important stuff. We talked about things that really mattered to us.
Yeah. And I think what's exciting about this part is two queer brown boys living together in the same space. As much as we were good friends, I don't know if we got to know a lot about each. We didn't live in the same space, so we didn't get to know everything about each other. No. And I think this really uncovered some of those things, which I love, and sometimes I hate.
I took the garbage out today, just so we're clear.
Thank you for doing that. I appreciate it so much.
Oh, you said thank you. I'm here for it.
Oh my god, how dare you? First of all, just so everybody out there knows, Rahim finally figured out the garbage day was a Wednesday about a month ago. And we've been here for 7 months. So take that back, girl.
I can only have so many skills. One of them is answering questions. So...
I think let's talk about that. Okay, so I think here we came to Winnipeg together, and I think in my head, I rely on you so much in Toronto. I was like, when we've talked about how when I've had relapses, you show up for and uncalled, and you're just like, hey boy, just checking up on you, and I'm like, oh, I'm freaking out. And I noticed that this is how all your friends are like that with you. I've seen you pick up a phone in the middle of us going to a party and someone's like, hey, Rahim, I have a quick thing for you. And you were problem solving like this. I think what people don't get to see is, and I got to see, was the humanness of you, the boy who comes home after being present 100% with everybody and then being like, oh my God, I just crashed. And I was like, oh my God, he crashes. I guess I never thought of that. I never thought of how human you were. And I mean, you don't take out the garbage. I don't care. But you cook, you clean, you do a lot of great other things that cleaning isn't your skill, but it's also my
neuroses.
My neurosis from my addiction. And I need it. It's where I have control.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about this. So, as a therapist, you're a problem solver. We just talked about people call you in the middle of the night or the middle of the day and you answer. So what is the difference? And we had the last 6 months living together. So tell me the one thing or a few things that is different that you didn't learn in a textbook or you thought you learned in a textbook that challenged the way you behaved with me and the
Mm,
difference between living with an addict and reading about an addict.
sure. Well, it's not just about the reading. I think when I work with people who struggle with substance use as a therapist, there's a kind of distance that allows me to have like this ongoing empathy. You know, they can come into the therapy room and say, "Oh, I pissed my friends off. I pushed people away. I sabotaged this relationship," or I used again, missed a work deadline, and I might get fired. And I'm just like, I have endless empathy. I mean, sometimes I run out and I'm like, okay, like, let's make some changes. But often I have quite a bit of empathy to draw from. But there's something about the distance in therapy and the frame of that 1 hour a week or 1 hour every other week that allows me to have that kind of positive regard for someone. I think living with you, um, I'm no stranger to addiction in that, I'm compulsive at times with my alcohol use. But the way we each use substances looks different, right?
Very
And I think, yeah, 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 it's true. And I think some of the things that are like I recognize firsthand are just like the clashes of like how we want to spend our free time and what feels like a fun idea, right? So I'm often like, hey, let's drink and go for a walk. Let's smoke pot and do this. Let's do a bump of K and do the other thing. And most drugs for you are sexualized,
right.
right? And you're like, what's the like if I'm not having sex, what's the point of these drugs? And I'm like, oh my God, like I like sex. I look for sex. I long for sex, but it really isn't an extracurricular activity for me. I think it's an interest and a hobby and central in your life, in a particular way.
Right.
And so that's hard to reconcile sometimes. I'm like, oh my God, like, why can't we just do drugs for fun and hang out and talk and do this other thing? So that's one big difference. I think the other thing is that um, if I have a client who's using substances and they're like, part of me predicts that they might relapse or they might not be able to stick to their word, I'm okay with that. I'm like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like then they'll come back and it's a learning opportunity. With you, I think I'm like, I see it and I'm closer to it. And so if you come home and you've just used and you're like, oh, I made a bad choice, I'm in a bad space, I'm experiencing anger at that moment because I'm like, you kind of went off, did whatever you wanted. And like as an adult, you should be able to do that. And me caring or being frustrated makes me rethink my own attachment. Like, makes me think, am I too invested in Shafiq? Are we too close? Am I treating him like he's my boyfriend? Am I treating him like he's my patient? Like, how do I separate from that? And then I realize that no, my anger is about care and it's about grief because I'm worried about you and you want those things in a relationship. You don't necessarily want me to stop caring. You don't want me to leave you alone, right? And I think one of the big realizations was like, I really trust you as a person. I can rely on you for a lot of things. But sometimes, as a result of our experiences together, I don't always believe what you're saying. So, like, I trust you as a human, but I don't always believe what you're saying. I'm like, huh, she's got something else up her sleeve. We'll figure it out in 2 days. We'll see how it pans out.
Oh my God, give me an example. Like, so, yeah, give me an example. Where would you say? Because I think one of the big things for me in my recovery is honesty, right? So I try very best to make sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that if I'm not honest, I'm in trouble, and I know when I know I lie. Like, I'll lie before usage. Like, if my mind's like I need to use, that's kind of where I'll hold on to things. But majority of the time, my goal
Yeah.
is the only way for me to successfully be in this space is to be honest about it. So I'm very curious to find out where
Yes.
where the mistrust is, and yeah, let's start with that.
Yeah, I think it's hard. Like, I think it's like, okay, if you say you're going to go hang out with someone and you're going on a walk with them, part of
Mm-hmm.
me is like, I 80% think that's true. And 20% of me is like, they could also party and end up somewhere else. And then I'll get a text later at night,
Right.
Um, or it'll be like, if I'm out of town for a weekend, which I've had to do, or you're out of town for a weekend, just the idea that like
Yeah.
you being alone means that you could use. or you'll say that I have too much work to do and I'm not going to, and I'm like, I'm not in town, or I'm not here that time. Like, he's for sure going to, and I want to trust that you're going to keep to your word. But I also, you don't need to keep to your word. Like, you can also do what you want,
Yeah.
but your word is hard to like follow. I'm like, what is he covering up? And I'm glad you bring up this idea of the honesty bit, right? Because I think if you're honest about your use, it eliminates the shame, or at least targets the shame.
Right.
But sometimes you don't want to be honest, because if you're honest, then you have to be accountable,
Right.
right? So if you say, hey, I'm thinking of using this weekend, and I'm like, I'm not comfortable with that because we haven't gotten our second doses yet, and the variants are blah, 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 of COVID. Now you've been honest. And now what? Now you have to be accountable, right? So I
Right.
think when people lie, it's not just that they feel ashamed, they also don't want to have that accountability. Like, if they share what they feel with somebody or that they're going to use, then the other person might have opinions about that. And that becomes tough.
No, thank you. I mean, thanks for saying that. I think one of the things that has been really great in this household and challenging for my addict brain. So I was like, I have two brains. I have like the addict brain and the chef brain. And
Yeah.
like we've talked about this on our multiple walks, but this idea that
Yes.
like my addict brain loves the idea of being curious. Like, I want to be sneaky. I want to get out of the apartment. Like, you were supposed to be in Vancouver last weekend. I'm sorry, in Alberta last weekend, and
Yeah.
like, but this is the first time in months we've lived together where I was like, I think I'm going to use, I hear, like, I've lined up some of the things, and I know partially it was like I'm busy as fuck right now, and I don't have time to, like, I logically don't have time to, so my non-addict brain's like, you're
Yeah.
so busy, you don't have time for it, but my addict brain was like, Rahim's leaving, go and take out some money. Like, those things automatically happen, and I don't know, like, I can't seem to reconcile that, because my brain would be like, why are you being sneaky? And like, it's taken towards the end of our relationship for me to be like, this is a space where you don't have to be sneaky and just do it. And it's the first time I did it. And I don't, like, it's not
You
like,
can get off on being sneaky, and I will take your $100 bill, and you can orgasm to that. You got robbed. You had a time. Done.
I mean, it's not the kind of fun I want to have, but it did, like, it's an interesting thing that, like, so as a therapist, let's talk about this, right? So as a therapist, if I'm telling you that, like, every intention in my body is like not to do this. I like, but there's still a part of me
Yeah.
that just automatically gets into this headspace, even though I know it's not
Mm.
right, and I can't. Like, I want to say I've tried. I just still can't just shake it out,
Yes.
and it's like
Yes.
lucky. I'm so unlucky to be in a space where we're drug positive and sex positive and friendly, and like you are all these things that should make it easy for me. Yet I choose for it not to be. Like,
Right.
like I can't even
Okay.
reconcile that in myself.
Okay. So you want to know how I make sense of
Yeah.
the addict brain versus the other brain as
Mm-hmm.
it applies to you. Well, one thing I should say is that, I try to be drug positive and sex positive, but I'm not always, right? Because sometimes, like, just to be very fair, sometimes my judgment or my envy or my resentment gets in the way of that. Like, it's a more complicated picture, right? So I just want to put that out there. Um, Now, I don't, I rarely call anyone an addict. You use that language a lot.
Correct.
And so imagining, so I'm taking this idea of like there's two pieces or two parts of you, right? And I think about two parts of you that have two very different needs that have there's some tension between them. The part of you that wants to sneak around and like have fun, and part of the fun is to engage in trickery, hide and not let anyone find you, um, have like a double life. There's certain things that I think are very like exciting for you. And then there's another part of you that thinks about like control, responsibility, long-term planning. Like, on your wall in your room, you have a little cutout from like a bank brochure or something that says, talk about finances with your partner or something. And I've always looked at that and I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, is this
Mm-hmm.
like, what is this commercial? That's like, but for you, that's a big part of that's another part of who you are. So all I'm suggesting here is that I think there's two parts of you that are sometimes that are having a hard time integrating. They see themselves in opposition with one another. um, Now, we could go further to suggest that perhaps the part of you that wants to have fun is like a younger version of you, and the part of you that wants to be really super responsible, plan long term, is like a reaction to your family of origin, or you've adopted something from your family that's either like, you don't want to disappoint them, or you want to be specifically not them. I don't know what it is necessarily, but that's how I see these two parts coming together. I don't know. What are your reactions? I could talk more
No, I think that's really great. I think
about
that
drug use.
no. I think that's great. I think the thing you brought up is that a lot of us in the South Asian community come out later because we are closeted or
Mm,
we. So in my generation of people, right? So I always joke about this idea that like I was so lucky that Will and Grace happened. Like I have friends who are 2 or 3 years older than I am that are still that are closeted, had to marry women, had to do a very different life than I did. And I always joke about the post Will and Grace and the pre Will and Grace. And I am
mm,
so lucky I got the post Will and Grace. But there's still a whole
yeah,
generation of men in my culture, in our culture,
yeah, yeah,
who
yeah.
are living this life, right? So who still have all these things that they have to adhere
Like
to.
conform to.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So then, how do you like? I mean, I love the idea that it's just two parts of us. That this is just two parts of me, right? One is this like I have to be
Mm-hmm.
this person. The other one is the fun part. So a lot of me and the people before me, my generation, have missed out on a youth, like because it came out a lot later. So we feel like we've lost out on like what it means to be fun and gay when we're younger. And it's not just to it's
Mm.
not just to brown people, but it's also like also lots of older white people in
Yeah,
the same spot.
sure.
Um, I mean, like
But yeah, I have something for this.
go
So
for it,
here's the
go for
thing.
it.
I wouldn't completely credit popular television, like pre Will and Grace, post Will and Grace, because I think there's something to it. But I
Right.
also think that people who weren't able to come out and they're navigating two different worlds. I think there is two different selves there.
Mhm.
But you're seeing that you're in the post Will and Grace world and you have two selves too. They just looks different,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's not about there's two parts of you and they each need attention. I think there's two parts of you that need to be integrated, meaning,
Mm.
the fun part of you needs to learn about how fun can happen without threatening the long term stuff. Like you're still responsible if you party. Like I think
Hmm.
that's a message you have to embed. And another one would be that, um, you know, uh, I'm going to be responsible in these ways. And responsible people also take breaks. Like you could be both things. And when I first met, like when we first came to Winnipeg, you were waffling on where you wanted to be on the harm reduction continuum, if I recall, right? And you had this idea of like, I got to wake up at 5 a.m. I got to do yoga. I got to do this. I got to do that. It's a very particular version of you that is like, quote unquote, like sober Shafiq. And then there's the party one of you. And I think figuring out a medium of
Mm.
like, because both come, like one comes with rigidity and the other one comes with like letting loose. And I think finding a
Right.
medium is the work, right? So that drug use doesn't become harmful. And so also your rigidity around work doesn't become harmful. It could happen both ways.
Right. Okay. Well, that's actually really good advice. I thank you for that. I mean, like I was thinking about like when we came to Winnipeg, it's because I was high for most of last year, right? Like I lost my mind. Last goes are like from February till about June of last year. It was a way of
Mm-hmm.
managing my emotions, and the pandemic happened. So the grief and loss was so big that
Yeah.
when we came to Winnipeg, I was like, great, I've got distance, I've got blah 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 blah, and so here is how I know based on my earlier models of CAMH, CMA, and all that kind of stuff is
Yeah.
this is what I need to stay sober and be good here. And you're right, that only lasted a couple of months until that cracked. And then I think when that crack happened, we got to talk about how, okay, like it can't be this rigid. There has to be some air coming in and out in order for it
Yeah.
to feel more natural. Um, yeah,
But
some like
that's where there's when you were talking about like living with the addict, like there's also like the recovering side of you. I know lots of people don't like the language of recovering, but I think that's what you were embodying when you're like rigidity, wake up at 5, go to bed early. And while that structure is useful for you, I think it came in the way of us being able to connect at times, right? I would be like,
right,
okay, I guess we're going to bed now, or I guess I'll watch TV alone. So I'd wake up later than you and go to bed later than you, which is fine. And that gives us both a certain kind of alone time. Like there's a benefit
right,
to it. But if the goal of the new structure in your life away from use is to spend time with people and just be, then that wasn't necessarily happening.
Yeah, so I think like I'll rebuttal with you on that one because I think like I feel like that's been my structure. Like this get up early, like that's been my structure for
Mm.
years. Like since high school, like I was in the swim team, so I would get up at 5
Oh
a.m.
wow.
Like so I'd be at the pool by 5:30. So the structure may
Holy
seem new
shit.
for in our relationship, but
Yeah.
that's been my go-to from the get-go. Like I think of it like this summer of Limitless and bike rally. Like I was always up at 5 a.m. I would do a run. I would do like that's actually what my life looks like outside of us interacting. And I think because the first time we have lived together, you get to see this because otherwise
Yeah.
you see post shopping or like if I ever had to come meet you specifically, not you specifically, but if I ever knew I had plans with you at night or I had to go, I would take a nap in between. Like they would always still
Ah.
start this early. Like I would, oh, I know how much you hate the napping, but it's interesting that you think that's it's my recovery strategy, but that's just actually what my life looks
It's who
like.
you are. I had
Yeah.
no idea.
Yeah. So
I
this
had no
and this
idea.
has been since I have been in high school. So it's not, and this is like
Mm.
what my life would look like outside of us because I don't think we never we never lived together, so we don't know what our daily looked
Yeah.
like. And if I would see you at 7 o'clock at a club, I would
Yeah.
need to have a nap for 2 hours before I see you.
Of course. No, no, no. That's fair. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because if you didn't keep up with me, I'd be so mad. I'd be like, "You're going home early?" Like,
Oh.
absolutely not.
And
You know, you know.
no, I know. Let's talk about grief. I think grief is one of the things I really learned from you to one recognize and then be okay to sit in it. And as queer men, like there's a lot of grief that is in our life or we go through in our life.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell? What would you tell? Um, what would you tell other gay men about grief and how to sit with grief and how to be and how to sit with grief?
Yeah.
Actually, wait, no. Let me do it
Yeah. Thanks.
into. Sorry, let me do it into
Okay.
two. How do you tell them to recognize the grief and then to be okay with the grief because it's the only way for us to move forward is to be okay with the grief.
Okay. So recognizing grief is, I'm glad you separated it. So grief is just your body's response to loss. And we lose a lot of things in our life that are not necessarily death related, right? So we have to really broaden our idea of what loss is. And as much as grief could be experienced like an emotion, right? If the experience of loss isn't one concrete thing, it's an ongoing experience of loss or it's a complicated loss. Um, you know, I don't think grief shows up as just one experience. It's not just I'm sad or I'm feeling edgy on edge today. I'm emotional. I think, grief is like a full body experience. It engages you physically, emotionally, socially. And so I think we have to recognize what it is we're feeling, like what is bringing our body down or what's weighing on it, right? Like what are some of the sources and causes? So ending a relationship, the cumulative impact of rejection on online apps, seeing our body change, watching ourselves age, seeing that we can't do the same things we used to be able to do. Um, when we make a mistake at work and we fall short of um, how we wanted to perform, right? We grieve. There's a loss around who we thought we were as experts or how well we thought we could perform. As queer people, I think the kinds of losses we endure have to do with family often. If it's not direct family estrangement, it's often, the loss of not having adult relationships with our parents or siblings, feeling somehow adopted or removed from our families of origin. We look at other people and we're like, oh, those parents get along in a different way with their queer kid or their trans kid. And we're like, oh, why can't my family be more like that? Right. So I think those are all the kinds of losses we experience. And as we get older, I think we've seen like research shows that gay men in particular have another peak in the incidence rate of suicide in their 40s, late 30s, 40s, right? And so to me, I mean, I can only try to make sense of that data, but I think it's when a lot of our straight counterparts like have homes and kids and end up spending a lot of time with their primary time with their life
Spouses.
partners, where another kind of isolation sets in for us about like as we're creating our own script in the world. So that's how we identify grief. What was your second question? Was it how to deal with it or how to manage it?
I mean, yeah, I think it was like how do we manage it, but I don't like. I think we're all going to manage it differently. But I think identifying it is the
Yeah.
first step. And I think what you've taught
Yeah.
me in living with you is that I didn't think of those things as grief before, right? They weren't like while I felt them
Mm,
in my body, I didn't think of them as grief. And it's
yeah.
part of life. It's okay for you to say goodbye. It's okay if like your best friend gets married, has kids. You're part of their life, but you can't be 100% part of their life. And it's okay. It's okay then to be like, okay, like I love you. We'll reconvene at another point. But it's a moment of grief that you lose. Fiza, who spoke in the podcast earlier, did the same thing too, where she's like, Shafik, when you came out, she had to like she didn't recognize it until recently, but she had to grieve our relationship because now we weren't Sheffic and Fiza who did all very heteronormative things. I think I was having a whole new life of gay people. I was meeting
Yes.
new friends. My
Yes.
life looked very different than hers did. And
Yeah.
while it was grief for her as well, but we didn't identify it as that bad. Again, grief wasn't bad, but it was a moment of being like, oh, there's a change and we have to, we felt it in our bodies.
Totally.
We didn't recognize it. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
feel that. I had a similar thing coming out with a lot of my girlfriends. A lot of my friends were like brown smiley girls. Um,
mine too.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And you know, like when I was coming out, I came out to them and they were very supportive, but like they weren't the first people who were gonna jump out and be like, hey, let's go to cruise and tangos together. Like that wasn't their scene, right? I was tagging along with them to go to like the entertainment district on Richmond or Adelaide or whatever.
Yeah.
And I needed to separate, and that was grief. And I had to find a new community, and I didn't understand myself. That was grief. Uh, and then I had to like kind of reintegrate all of these parts of my life, you know, and that felt nice. More recently, that felt nice.
So we talk about this grief as gay people, but also one of the lovely things, and you're part of this for me, is chosen family. Like I think, we may lose these things that
What did
are.
you call me?
You heard me. No, I said chosen family,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
right? Like I think about yes. While I had all my brown girlfriends when I first came out the summer of like coming out, we were at cruising tangos every day, blah blah blah. Once they moved on, I also got a chance to meet new queer people and have a different chosen family, a different experience, and that's so
Yeah.
like now as I'm getting older, like I feel like in the last year or so, my queer chosen family stepped up in such a different way because they
Mm.
understand. And my elder children, like the elders in my chosen family, were like, "Oh, this is okay. Here's a normalization of things." So I didn't feel like I had to follow. But I think I thought I had to follow this heteronormative pattern for the longest time. Like
Mm.
there's a joy in
You
that.
mean
Like
like queer? These were like older queer people.
yeah, yeah,
I
right.
see.
Who I look up to,
Mm.
and we're like, and I was like, oh my god, I'm feeling this and this, and they're like, yeah, that kind of happens. Like as you get older, statistically, the queer person in the family takes care of the aging parents because your married parents, your married brothers and sisters have their own family to take care of. Right, so we
Mm.
developed this like really, I don't know, like a cute children, like we develop additional support somewhere else. So while our
Yeah.
and then I love the joy in that. I think there's something really,
Mm.
like there's something cute about having that in our lives. You have a
Yeah.
great chosen family system. We call them the Western Pod. Um, so let's talk about how, like, as a queer brown man, how, and none of them are. Oh wait, no, there's a brown. There are some browns in there.
Yeah.
um, like, how does that? So it's not a transition, but how does that feel? Like, I'm trying to think of the right word for it, but like, it's not like they replaced your brown straight girlfriends, but they kind
Mm.
of did, and they're kind of who are going to continue with us as we move forward. Is that correct for me to
Mm.
say or feel? I mean, it's an
I mean,
exploratory question.
look, I think my queer fam are people that I do see them more regularly and we're in touch more regularly. And we've all made conscious choices to live in the city, like at times whether we can afford it or not. Because there's been something about city living that's been important to the queer experience, right? So we're close to each other, we're close to the bars. And as long as we live in this kind of density, there's less pressure to be in relationships in general or relationships that conform to any particular script, right? So they've been accessible to me, and they've like I think we've understood each other's lives quite a bit. I would say in the last few years, though, I really have reconnected with a lot of my like childhood girlfriends, and they never went away. Like they've always
Right.
been there. They've always been cheering me on. They've always been supportive, and I think we're finding ways now, especially through the pandemic, to really like stay in touch more and be in each other's lives. But I do think that I think a lot of queer people have a different like developmental trajectory. Like there's different things that we have to go through and experience. And we live in a culture or a subculture of different norms, like different things are normal for us. And some separation is almost necessary, like
Right.
it's common for us, like well into our 30s, to go to the bars and go dancing on the weekend, to have casual sex, to do MDMA and go to a circuit party, to make sure we're at a beach on the weekend. It means something different for us to travel to New York City. Like
Yeah.
these are things that are like some people in your life will get more than others, and I think it's not like I think so much of it is just like it's a subculture of queerness that brings us together.
Yeah, and I guess like up until I would say recently for me, I was mourning that thing. But like well, I mean, the last couple of years where I was like, I need to get married, I need to have kids, I need to look like, and that was a very heteronormative model for me. And there's also a very
Mm,
post Will and Grace model for me, to be honest with you, right? Like we were
mm.
allowed to have it all, um, and yes, we're still allowed to have it all, but it wasn't. It was a reality that I fought and fought for that didn't end up for me, and
Yeah.
I'm obviously still working through it, you're right. Like I think like our girlfriends, like we come back. Like there's a subculture that happens, and right, those girlfriends never leave. They're always around.
Hmm.
It's like Salima Kamani says, it'll all wash out at the end. We just have to trust that it
Hmm.
will.
Hmm.
And I don't have that. I
Yeah,
didn't
I
have that
know.
trust.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you bring up like kids and stuff. Like, of course, we can have it all,
Mhm.
but part of wanting to have it all is also like a kind of resistance, like letting people know that we are as good as straight people.
Right,
Um, and we're socialized in a straight world to want the same things. Those aren't inborn. I don't think they're biological, blah, blah, blah. They're just learned things.
right.
And it takes a lot of work to unlearn them. And I think there's a lot of grief in that. Like, my life won't look this way. I won't have the opportunity to do this. Or if I did it, it wouldn't be celebrated in the same way as my straight counterparts, right? I think there's grief all over that.
Well, let's talk the grief. I don't know why we're so on grief, but like we're in a pandemic. We fled from Toronto. We didn't fly. We left Toronto to come here for what we thought we would have more freedom to do. We would hang out with our friends in parks, go dancing, and none of that happened for us.
Why are you doing this to me? Why are we talking about this? Yes, it's been painful.
But what have you learned from that? But like, yes, it's been painful, but like,
Yeah.
tell me the learning out of that. Like, I know we came with a well, we you came with a very specific idea of what you thought Winnipeg was going to offer you. For me, it was to run away from Toronto and be in a safe space with you and explore the things. So I feel like I've gotten
Right.
everything I needed for this from coming to Winnipeg plus more. Tell me what you learned
Mm.
from this idea of leaving was
Well,
painful.
I okay. I think
Oh,
I think there's something about like wanting to gain a sense of control,
right.
and thinking that I'm riding, I'm leading my own ship here, I'm doing my own thing, and somehow like there's this narcissism where I think like I'm gonna make the fabulous choice and be somewhere where I'm not affected by the pandemic, like I'm not that special, I'm not that powerful, like there's a pandemic, most people are told to stay where the hell you are, and I chose to move, and so like serves me right, like we were in full lockdown here. That's fine. I have to accept that. I think I'm humbled by that. It brings up some like irritation, but also humility. I think the other piece that I think about is, one of my other goals, which did get actualized, was that I would get to reduce my isolation. And I did, because I've been living with you. We've been cooking together. Like that's been lovely. And another part of it has been to get to a different time zone. Like
Mhm.
astrologically, to be in a different time zone where things are a little bit slower, where my chart looks a little bit different, and the pressure of money isn't the same as it is in Toronto, so that I can focus on writing. And I pumped out 2 book proposals, and I secured 1 publisher. I'm still working on the second one, but some of those goals were met; they were actualized, and I think I credit the move for getting those things done.
110%. I think from someone who got to watch you, I think you came with such a like. If I look at Rahim when we first survived and Rahim where we are now, like yes, you've always been the guy who pumps things out. You work hard, but I think the things that came out of it is so much more than I think we would have been in Toronto, because I think Toronto was so overweighing at that time, and with the pandemic within our community as well, there was just so much happening, and within the community, I mean within the queer community. But that was that I think really helped pump stuff out. I'm super excited to read your book. I can't wait for it to get out there, be published. I'm super excited about you going to South Africa to to explore this. I think it's gonna be so fun for you. I think it's gonna be, and I 100% always have believed that you are such a community shaker that what you create is gonna be so useful for generations coming, so that we will tell our children about this book. I'm excited about that.
And just so you know, Marjorie, and so your children will one day know.
This is Miss Rahim Thawer.
Except I'm not from Georgia, but I will make the lights go out.
Yeah. No, I know. You come in. Lighting is your thing. I got it. All right. So one of the deep questions I've always I'm so curious to ask is, you're so good at boundaries. So boundaries. I mean, creating a safe space for someone who, again, sex positive, drug positive space. I'm always curious about what made you think. Did you ever come and snoop in my room? So I have, I guess I have a lie to tell you, or to come to clean with you. So I wouldn't know if there was did you ever come in a room and snoop around to sort of see where things were, to make sure I was safe? I wouldn't use it as snooping, but I think I would look at them as Rahim came to check out to make sure it was a safe space. Did you ever
Not
do
even
that?
Once.
Oh wow! And what?
Not even once.
How? I would have completely gone through all your things, just so we're clear. If I thought you were,
you had your own bathroom.
Yes.
And so if I was taking down the garbage, which as our viewers know, would have just been in the last month, I would have come into your bedroom for that. Or sometimes I'd be like, I'm in a mood to clean windows, and I know that your bathroom mirror is disgusting. I'm like, let me go clean that for her. Right. But beyond that, no. I went in your room once to pee because you were in the shower, but I've never snooped through your things.
So I feel if I'm so different, that I would have been okay, Rahim's using. I would go look through your stuff to make sure that I mean, I guess that's not a really drug positive environment.
I mean, if you had drugs that I was interested in, maybe. But what would I do with it?
Right, true, nothing. Okay, so I'm going to tell you.
And then I would have to smell your Burberry cologne everywhere.
First of all, it's Tom Ford, and it's wood.
What?
It's the oud, so how dare you? It's a different price point.
Whatever. I hate whatever. I hate cologne, and I would just have to smell it in your room, and that's none of that's pleasant for me.
Okay. So I guess.
Okay. Next thing.
So I guess my only lie was, we talked about this already, but I was saving for the podcast. So do you remember that one time I had gone to the Mirror Hotel with Andy? So we had talked about, we're okay, great, we're going to do a planned use, and we're going to structure it and explore. And for me, I was
that was cool. Great.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And then that Sunday.
That was the first time you planned use, right? In a very structured way.
And was very honest with the person in my, I was very honest with you about it. We had a nice plan. And it worked out really great, to be honest with you, because I don't remember the hangover being that bad. But no, I do. The splits. Yeah. So the so the hangover was okay, but that Sunday when we had talked about this, you're like, oh, there's a lot of ruckus in your room, and you were afraid to come in to see who was there. So Andy was over that night. And again, that was part of I could have been completely honest with you. You were quite we were so great about the Mirror Hotel, but still my sneaky brain was I'm just gonna sneak him in for a little he was leaving at 4 a.m. He came at 2:30 or something, and you went to pee at 3:30. So just the collision was interesting. But I just held on to that secret until now because I feel like it was an interesting one to share to let you know that noise. And you called it. You were like, I don't know who was in your room, and I was like, nobody. How dare you?
Yeah. So part of the, when I say like I don't always believe you, if I have to wake up to pee in the middle of the night, I'll sometimes look at the shoes and I'll be like, are the shoes thrown about? Because you're such a neat person.
Right.
So if the shoes are thrown about, I'm like, oh, something's going on here.
Mm.
But I'm glad you got a thrill out of it because I don't feel affected by that at all because
no, I know.
From a risk perspective, like a COVID risk perspective, you already were with that person all weekend.
Yeah.
And I know as somebody who doesn't do meth but has done stimulant drugs or knows it like likes to party, like there is a desire to keep it going. You're like, oh, why not? Like, let's just go with this, right? Because then usually you're like, I got to take a break after this. I'm not going to be able to return to it. So like it kind of makes sense to me. I think it's like fascinating that you pair like part of your sexual fantasies are about sneaking around or being caught, and I think like I guess that's fun. That sounds great. Like that would give me so much anxiety, but like on the other end of it, like I'm like whatever, great. So I'm glad you did that. I don't feel any kind of way about it now, knowing that, except that I'm like, yeah, this guy doesn't always tell the truth. Like it does reinforce that belief. Because it's both like it's inconsequential on the one hand, and on the other hand, I'm like, oh yeah, this affirms this idea that I've had that I can't always trust Shafiq. I can't always believe what he says.
But 100%, I feel like in all the AA learning, and it's something I struggle with my sister Farah, is this idea that like she doesn't believe, she will never believe 100% of like trust. Once you've lost trust with anybody at any point, earning it back is really, really tough. And I know in this 12-step model, and actually I don't know in the 12-step model, that they talk about how like that's the hardest thing to rebuild back with people, specifically with your loved ones, right? I realized that I didn't press the timer properly, so we've gone over.
Okay.
For this podcast, but I think
we'll be back.
Yeah. But so
let's do a fast round. I really like the fast round.
Yeah. Ready? Okay.
Okay.
So the fast round is South Africa.
Writing and sex.
Mason.
True love.
Mohini.
Family.
Queer Browns.
Soul.
Psychotherapy.
Passion.
Winnipeg.
Cold.
Okay, your dad, I win. So I want to say thank you to. I want to say thank you to everybody who took time out of their busy schedule to hang out with us. Rahim and I have to do a second podcast because I feel like the first one was really all about meth and living with drugs and living with an addict, and our second one we're gonna get a little more fun and personal. So we'll see you bitches next week. Bye.
Bye.